Every participant, thank you so much for joining this event. Please change your name format to your name underscore the country that you're from. And please turn on your cameras and mute your mic, possible. Okay, so now we have our guest speaker here with us. So before we start our event, we will have a quick opening by ALSA International President. So Ms. Audrey, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, B, for the opportunity. So, good afternoon, everyone. The respected Mr. Muhammad Azizuddin as our speakers. It is such an honor to have you, sir, in our legal discussions. So this legal discussion with the team, the aftermath of Gaza war in 2014, aims to spread the awareness to our members and the publics on the issue pertaining on Israel and Palestine situations. So back in like 2 months ago, we heard in every media about what's happened in that area. And today we are going to discuss further on the international law perspectives on the 2014 Gaza war. I hope after this event, all the participants can increase their awareness and also reach on their knowledge on this particular issue. Strong inside and leading outside, ALSA, always be one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Audrey, for the opening. And seeing that we have such an intimate setting here in Zoom, we hope that everyone can take part in the discussion along with the professor. And this is also being broadcasted on ALSA International account on YouTube. So before we start with the videos from the speakers from Israel and Palestine, maybe we could get a quick introduction by the guest speaker who are with us today. So Professor, could you please give us a quick introduction for everyone to get to know you?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Professor Dr. Muhammad Azizuddin Muhammad Sani. I'm a professor of politics and international relations from School of International Studies, University Utara Malaysia, or Northern University of Malaysia. So I'm very close, meaning I observe very closely the event recently with regard to the conflict between Israel and Palestine. And I'm also, actually my background mostly I've done a lot of studying about human rights, freedom of speech, and even though now I'm attached with Institute Utara Malaysia, but I used to attach with several other institutions. For example, like Yusof Ishak Institute of Southeast Asia Studies, Singapore, and also National Institute of Development and Administration, NIDA, from Bangkok, Thailand. So, but at the same time, so now I'm also the adjunct professor from Taylor's University in Malaysia, and yeah, I think yeah, that's basically my background. So I'll pass back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. So now we will be moving on to the videos from the speakers or the law experts from Israel and Palestine. So ALSA International have conducted the interview with them, and we will be hearing about them soon. So, okay, so first we will start with the video from Israel. So I hope all participants would take note listening to them so that we can discuss about the different expressed in the videos with the professor later on. Please, okay.
For our audience, it'll be better if we can take the time for you to
Give me a moment.
Introduce yourself first before moving on to the first question.
So my name is Michael Sfard. I'm an Israeli human rights attorney. I have a small office in Tel Aviv in Israel that is dedicated to human rights litigation. I'm the legal advisor of several Israeli human rights organizations and peace groups, Palestinian communities, Palestinian and Israeli activists. Almost all my work is related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, both in the occupied Palestinian territories, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip, but also internally in Israel. I represent Bedouin communities and the Palestinian minority in Israel also. My work includes working with human rights defenders and peace activists and maintaining the space for their activism, and also, of course, representing victims of human rights abuse by Israeli authorities. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in order to lay down the history of that conflict, which is more than 100 years old, one needs more than 5 minutes, probably more than an hour, and probably a whole, academic year course in order to really understand it. But to be a little simplistic, there are two nations who are living in the same territory. The Jews who came back to the land of Palestine as a part of the idea that Jews should have a political self-determination in the form of a state in this area after 2 millenniums of being in what we call the diaspora in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in America. And basically, in the 19th century, the Zionist movement that was created was advocating for Jews to return to the Holy Land and establish a state that would be a homeland for the Jewish people. And the second nation is the Palestinians, the indigenous people of this place who are living here for centuries, and they are part of the Arab world. And in 1948, this tension between the two communities culminated in a war between the Arabs, including Arab nations, including the Palestinians, and the newly established Israeli state. And during that war, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were driven out of their villages and towns within Israel, creating a massive refugee community of Palestinians in neighboring countries, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, and in the Gaza Strip. And they are still, for the fourth or fifth or sixth generation refugees who were not allowed to go back to their lands. And in 1967, a war between Israel and its neighbors ended with more occupation by Israel of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, the Golan Heights from Syria, the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and the Gaza Strip also from Egypt. So the Gaza Strip and the West Bank that houses millions of Palestinians, some of them refugees from the 1948 war, others indigenous of these areas, became under Israeli control too. And so since 1967, for the last 54 years, Israel is occupying these lands in a military occupation. Now, if we'll focus on Gaza, the Gaza Strip went through different stages in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. For our discussion, what is important to note is that in 2005, Israel has carried out the disengagement plan, and which means that Israel has pulled out its civilians from Gaza and realigned its forces around Gaza. We are still in control of the airspace of Gaza. We control all the land borders of Gaza. we control the sea, the shores of Gaza, and we control many things like the flow of electricity and water to Gaza, and we also control the population registry in Gaza. So basically, Gaza is still under occupation, but also, it's not only under occupation, but since June of from June of 2007, when the Hamas took over Gaza and drove the PLO out of Gaza as a governing.
Wait, I'm not sure. Give me a moment. Okay. Yes.
When the Hamas faction took over in June of 2007, Israel has decided to impose a closure, a siege on Gaza. That means that no one is allowed to go out of Gaza and no one is allowed to go into Gaza, except very rare exceptions. And Gaza is basically under a closure for 14 years. 14 years that 2 million people in Gaza cannot go out of Gaza. There are very, very rare exceptions for that people can leave Gaza. Also, goods flow to Gaza and out of Gaza is very closely monitored. There are many goods that are not allowed in. So Gaza is under siege. And that's the background for the recurring escalations and hostilities between Israel and Gaza. The people of Gaza want to end this siege, which made their life impossible completely and difficult. The whole economy of Gaza collapsed completely. It's one of the most populated areas densely populated areas in the world. And there's the state of Israel who sees the Hamas as a terrorist organization, which it is, that fires rockets intentionally on Israeli civilian centers. That is why Israel has mobilized the whole world to support the closure of Gaza. That's the background. Hamas is a party, is a Palestinian party, and it is a very popular one. Many Palestinians support a political Islam group or movement, which, while it is a popular faction, it is also engaging in attacks on Israeli civilians and attacks on civilians on purpose to gain political results is the definition of what a terrorist attack is. Now, Israel is not an angel too. Israel is committing a lot of crimes against Palestinian civilians in its war to maintain the Israeli control over millions of Palestinians. Let's not forget, the Palestinian people for the last 70 years, since the establishment of the State of Israel, and more so in the last 54 years in the occupied Palestinian territory, millions of people have no political rights. They cannot run for office. They are not eligible to vote and to be elected to the institutions where their future is being decided. And so Israel maintains an occupation, a military occupation government over them. And one of the ways that the Palestinian liberation movement is fighting for their independence and freedom sometimes includes vicious criminal terror attacks. That does not mean that the Israeli policy of maintaining the occupation and not allowing the Palestinians the same type of freedom and self-determination and independence that any people in the world are entitled to is justified. And so in the war, when it comes to Gaza, there are two issues here. One is the general aspiration of Palestinians for independence and freedom, which is a basic right that they should enjoy. And the second thing is the closure and the siege that lasts for 14 years with no end in sight, that makes the lives specifically of the millions that live in Gaza intolerable. When it comes to the rounds of armed hostilities between the Israeli forces and the Hamas Jihad Gazan forces, the main issue that I think lawyers that are engaged in international laws of war should pay their attention to is the question of the principle of distinction, which is the primary, most important principle of laws of warfare, the raison d'etre of this field of law, which instructs combatants to always direct their weapons to enemy combatants and to enemy military objects, and never to civilians or to civilian objects. And I think both parties to this conflict, both the Hamas Jihad and the Israeli armed forces, have been violating this principle constantly in the different rounds of wars that we had, cast-led in 2008-9, protective edge in 2014, and recently the war in last month in May of 2021. Now, the Palestinian forces violate this principle very clearly because they shoot missiles on Israeli cities and towns with the aim of, they are targeting civilians, which is a war crime. And indeed, the International Criminal Court prosecutor has decided to launch a criminal investigation into the suspicion that these practices are war crimes. Israel, on the other hand, not on the other hand, but Israel has also used practices which raise the suspicion that it violated the principle of distinction by targeting civilian objects, like in the recent attacks of towers in Gaza that were clearly civilian. Of course, the Israeli argument was that in these towers, there were also Hamas offices. But then two issues arise about that. First of all, these arguments were not in conformity with what Israeli spokespersons have said. And they said time and again that the targeting of the towers is done to show the Hamas and to show the people in Gaza that the Hamas and so on. And so there is a suspicion that the targeting of these towers was done in order to target it as a civilian object. Also, Israeli practice, both in the cast-led of 2014 and now, was to target homes of Hamas generals and officers. And a home, a family home of a combatant is a civilian object. It is not a military target. And it has been done in 2014 and it was done again last May. So again, in this, there are some practices that Israel has been engaging in that raise a suspicion that the principle of distinction was breached, and that means that it might amount to war crimes. One more issue is the principle of proportionality, because even the laws of war instruct us that even when you are targeting a legitimate target, combatants, enemy combatants, or military objects, you always have, you as a combatant, have to explore the question of how much damage is expected to be inflicted on civilians and civilian objects as a side product, not your intention, but that is a foreseeable outcome of the attack on the legitimate target. And if the damage to civilians and civilian objects outweighs the advantage gained by eliminating the military legitimate target, then the attack is disproportional and should not be carried out. And if it is carried out, might amount also to a war crime. And here, again, I'll give the example of the towers, because even if genuinely the targeting of the towers was done because the towers housed, among many other, news agencies and commercial companies, Hamas offices, which are a legitimate target because these were Hamas military offices. The question is whether the damage to all the civilians and civilian objects in that tower outweighs the advantage of eliminating the Hamas office. And here it seems to me, and of course this is something that has to be explored and examined, but it seems to me prima facie that this was definitely a disproportional attack, and again, it might amount to a war crime.
Thank you very much, sir, for your explanation.
Violation of human rights are a daily thing in this region. So I don't think I should now make a list because we will not end it ever. What I can say from a bird's eye view is that a government of occupation is a government whereby, according to international law, according to the laws of war, the political and civil rights of the occupied people are suspended for the duration of the occupation. And the occupation has to be temporary, and the occupying power must pursue an end for the occupation so that civil and political rights will be restored for those who are under occupation. And what we're seeing in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are 54 years of occupation where the occupied people are prevented from enjoying their civil and political rights, and an occupying power who is not pursuing an end to the occupation as it should, but rather to prolong it and perpetuate it and make it eternal. And this is, I think, the most important human rights issue, because from that stems all other human rights violations. The situation in which people, millions of people, are not involved in government is something that was perceived by international laws of occupation as temporary, as an exception, as something that would end quickly. And it didn't, and it doesn't. And that's the main human rights issue.
All right, so that was Mr. Michael Swart from Israel, and he's actually also advocating for the Palestinian people. So we are aware that that might not be entirely representative of certain, motive under Israel actions. However, it does explore a certain point of view there. So now we move on to the video from the experts who are firsthand growing up and living in Palestine, and then we will discuss these issues and then other questions from the videos and also on the issue with Professor here. So now we will move on to the video from Palestine. So please give me a moment just one moment. One thing to note is that there are certain issues during the filming of this with the experts from Palestine, which is that there are some audio issues. So throughout this video, we will be providing transcription within the chat box. So I will be putting up the transcription of what was being said onto the chat box at each topic is introduced. So if you cannot understand certain point, please look at the chat box to hear about what the experts were discussing. Okay, so now I'll be broadcasting the video from Palestine.
If you allow me to just give like some sort of a comment on the term or the terminology of conflict, it might be not the most accurate way to describe what's happening in Pakistan, because a conflict would entail that there are two equal sides, regardless of the difference in power. But at least there are two sides that are relatively on a similar level, fighting against each other. While the situation in Palestine kind of is a bit different in this regard. It started by ethnic cleansing, it started by genocide, and then it went on. Palestine is completely disjointed politically, institutionally, and in terms of its population. So the word conflict might not be the most descriptive of the situation. It is very safe to describe what's happening in Palestine as a clear case for apartheid, or similar to what we witnessed in South Africa. It's a case of occupation, a case of annexation and colonialism as well. If we look at the way this quote-unquote conflict started, it started by Britain taking over Palestine, establishing the British mandate over Palestine with the legal aim of developing the population to be able to establish their own state independently. However, what we saw is that the United Kingdom, Great Britain at that time, started facilitating the Zionist agenda of migration into Palestine and establishing a state against the will of the local population, the indigenous population. Of course, refugees were welcome in the mandate Palestine at that time. Somebody running from war, nobody can tell them no. I mean, they're trying to save their own lives. However, soon after the migrations intensified, people realized that these were not just refugees. They came in as settlers, and they had a political project to dispossess this land from its owners and establish a state where these indigenous people are not to be citizens. So this was not a conflict in the traditional sense. The situation went on. Britain faced fierce opposition from the Palestinians. There were many incidents where Palestinians refused the British policies until Britain issued something called the White Paper in 1939, which was a documented legal promise that Britain would stop facilitating the Zionist agendas and facilitate the building of the Palestinian state for all its citizens. However, what happened is that Britain in 1948 unilaterally abandoned its responsibilities and withdrew, and the Zionist militias who were trained by Britain, some of them fought alongside British Army in the Second World War. They were more armed, more trained, more capable militarily. So they committed one of the ugliest stories of genocide and ethnic cleansing in the past century. 70% Palestinian population, 60 to 70% were forced out of their homes. They all turned into refugees. around 500 Palestinian villages were destroyed, villages and cities. You're talking about a total unmaking of Palestine, as one author described it. It went on, the situation went on until recently. Now you have Palestine politically unmade. Palestinians, they are divided into 4 categories. Some of them are living as supposedly citizens of the Palestinian state, which has no authority over the land in West Bank and Gaza. Some of them are citizens of Israel. They hold the Israeli. Basically, these are the ones who survived the ethnic cleansing of 1948. Some of them, but they live as second-class citizens. Some of them are in East Jerusalem. They are not citizens of anything. They're just permanent residents. And you witnessed the case of Yaqub and Sheikh Jarrah incidents last month, where on TV it was quite documented. The house of one Palestinian family in Jerusalem was stolen, and you have the Palestinian refugees outside Palestine. So this is a case for apartheid, as the UN ESCO report detailed a couple of years ago, but then it was withdrawn because of pressure from the United Nations. So now you're talking about apartheid, you're talking about occupation, you're talking about annexation, and you're talking about one side that has nuclear power, one side that is funded by the international superpower military, the United States, and the other side, basically, it's a disjointed entity. It's a disorganized population trying to find any way to seek their own rights. So that is how I see the situation.
Yes, I did, but not the exact war. I was in Gaza Strip in 2015, and I could see the destruction, the massive destruction as the result of the 2014 aggression on the Gaza Strip. So I was there, I met people, and I know what it means for them to be attacked by Israeli workers, planes from the sea, from the land, and from everywhere. And there was a total destruction of almost all the Gaza Strip. So it's not easy thing to do. Me, for just a witness after the match, what happened there, I was really shocked and devastated. I can't feel and I can't really imagine how people felt under those attacks at that time. So frankly speaking, Israeli so-called one-sided pull out of the Gaza Strip, the one that they called Sharon pull out of the Gaza Strip in 2015, in September 2015, was as a result of the Palestinian resistance to the Israeli occupation and the presence of the settlers in the Gaza Strip. So they, as what happened in Lebanon 2000, Israeli had to withdraw from the South Lebanon and from other areas in Lebanon because of the Lebanese resistance there. And this is what happened in Gaza in 2005. In September, Sharon realized that they cannot control the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip any longer. His army was so weak to pull out what they can call a really successful campaign against the Palestinians there, because most of the Palestinians there are civilians. Of course, there are resistant people who are fighting against the occupation. So what happened? They withdrew unilaterally from the Gaza Strip. And since then, the Gaza Strip is under control by the Israeli occupation forces, the Israeli occupation state.
Israel calls it an operation. Internationally, some people use the word war to describe what happened in 2014. I will let everyone be the judge of what it is, but I will just mention some of the facts that Israel admits to. In that war, 2,000 Palestinians were killed, a quarter of which were children. More than 500 people were children of those killed. 10,000 were permanently injured with a severe injury, with mutations or lighter injuries. But much more than that, there is no estimation in Gaza how much those who have been psychologically affected by the war, but you can easily comfortably say it's more than 90%, if not 100%. of the Gaza population has been affected by the war. While on the other side, Israel lost 67 soldiers in that war, again, and 6 civilians. These numbers are not disputed by Israel. So they might tell us something about what the situation is.
I hope things will go on and the ICC would really go on with proceedings, although I doubt that very much. If you remember in 2014 and following that aggression on the Gaza Strip, there was a Goldstone report. I'm sure you heard of it. And this Goldstone report pins out who were the criminals in that war, whether from the Israeli side or some from the Palestinian side. And Israel violations of international law in that report were very clear, very obvious. But for some reason, the UN decided to withhold this, the Human Rights Council in Geneva decided to withhold this report. And I don't know, under the pressure of maybe the Palestinian Authority at that time, there were much of the talk that the Palestinians withdrew this report and they did not want to go further on this. Honestly speaking, I don't nowadays, especially after the latest aggression on the Gaza Strip, most of the Palestinians, including myself, lost faith in the international community and in the international mechanisms that are there for supposedly to the vulnerable people and to the weak people. It seems that this ICC only prosecutes people from the African countries and not from any other European or the United States. Because the United States, according to so many organizations, human rights organizations, they have committed crimes in Iraq, they have committed crimes in Syria, they have committed crimes in Afghanistan, and nobody holds them accountable. So why should I believe that the ICC now would go on and prosecute the Israelis, giving the idea that what we have now, that the new prosecutor that will be succeeding Bensouda is someone who the Israelis think of very, I don't want to use the word very, but very friendly, but friendly for the Israelis. So they are now somewhat like, feeling safe that they won't be prosecuted in the ICC in The Hague. This is what I believe.
I believe this ICC investigation that has been commenced by the ICC the recent beginning of this year is a moment of truth for the ICC. The ICC has been accused several accusations about its impartiality and its independence. This investigation is a moment of truth for the court to prove otherwise.
For the people who don't know what is Hamas, Hamas is a militant group that was created in 1987 following the first Palestinian uprising, which was like, in December 1987, following a massacre of 6 civilian Palestinians by an Israeli army truck in the Jabalia refugee camp. So the whole Palestinian territories, including the so-called Israel boundaries, revolted against this incident in the Gaza Strip, against the killing of 6 innocent civilian workers coming back from their work, even inside Israel. So all Palestinians, from all ages, women, children, men, and old men, all came out to the streets to fight the Israeli army, who was controlling the whole of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip and East Jerusalem. So following that, it took months, and it was only civilians, Palestinian civilians, fighting against the Israeli army inside the cities and inside the villages in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. And there were some attacks that caused the killing of Israeli settlers, Israeli army, and so Hamas, as part of the what we call the Brotherhood of Islam, this is an international Islamic organization or movement. Hamas was part of it, and their main work in the Palestinian territory back then was only providing Palestinian people with social health services, to promote the life of the Palestinians living under occupation. But they couldn't stand still and watch the Palestinians being killed, shot and killed by the Israeli army. They couldn't watch their brothers, sisters, mothers, uncles, and members of their families being arrested by the Israelis and put in jail for a long time. So they have to change. So that's why, back then, they created this militant group called Hamas.
Right now, it's quite well known that Israel uses the name or the title of Hamas as a pretext to call this a conflict, to call this a war, that it has two sides fighting each other. It's quite important that we recall the history of the conflict and we recall the dates. Wael mentioned 1987. That was the foundation of Hamas. Israel's genocide, ethnic cleansing, Nakba, took place before the founders of Hamas were even born, some of them. The atrocities that have been committed by the Zionist militias and by the Nakba in 1948 and in the 1967 wars, and what went on, the apartheid, the treatment, the inhuman treatment to Palestinians, whether those citizens of Israel or whether those residing in West Bank, including Jerusalem or Gaza, has started before Hamas was even founded. It's quite important that we understand that the fact that Hamas exists is in no way a justification, or let's say a pretext to buy the Israeli narrative of making it sound as an equal conflict between two armies. So as far as international law is concerned, Israel is a party to the 4 Geneva Conventions. Israel, as the occupying power, has several responsibilities when it comes towards the Palestinians. These principles are, there is no dispute in international law or among the experts of international law that these principles do not apply to Israel. They all do, yet they are almost all broken. Israel has to respect the principle of distinction between civilians and militants. Israel has the responsibility to avoid civilian areas and civilian buildings. Israel has the responsibility to provide the basic needs of the lives of Palestinians, or at least, if not to provide, not to block the accessibility or the access of Palestinians to their basic needs, including electricity, including clean water, including freedom of movement, etc., etc. Israel should be respecting these laws, should abide by these laws, by these principles. However, just a quick look at the 2014 aggression on Gaza, we can see that civilian buildings were targeted as some sort of something that Israel termed called Dahya doctrine. I would be very glad if you could explain this doctrine in your documentary. I will write it in the chat.
Yeah.
Basically, Israel in 2006, after it faced severe or some sort of fierce resistance from the Lebanese in 2006, it started following a policy of burning the land and burning the civilians on this land to make the cost of resistance quite costly on the social, economic, and on the long-term effects. So this Dahya doctrine has been adopted by Israel in 2006 and has been applied in 2014 and in several other aggressions against the Palestinians. The point of this doctrine is to burn down the land, to build, to destroy as many buildings as possible, to kill as many civilians as possible, to make the cost of resistance, the cost of calling for your rights quite costly, or more than you can bear. It's some sort of torture that people use for prisoners, but on a large scale. So this Dahya doctrine has been applied again and again and again. It is the least that could be said about this doctrine, that is that it's quite genocidal. It's very ugly. I mean, we don't need to be experts in international law to know that this is very ugly, that this is not okay. Israel has broken these principles, distinction, civilians, its responsibility toward the Palestinian civilians, whether in West Bank or Gaza. Yet we can see that it took several bodies quite several years to be able to be okay with the idea of the ICC investigating these war crimes.
Okay, if I may add to that, if you want to apply international law in Palestine, which is for us the whole of Palestine, even the co-recognized boundaries of the Israeli state. In the 1967 war, when Israel occupied the rest of the Palestine, its mandatory Palestine, the military government declared that it would apply international humanitarian law. Israel, since it's member to the international community and it's part of the international humanitarian law treaties, at least the 1907 Hague regulations are applied to the Israeli behavior inside the occupied Palestinian territories. So the first military order that was issued was that they will respect international humanitarian law, which means the whole four Geneva Conventions. But later on, not very far from that day that they announced that they will respect international humanitarian law, they retreated and they said, oh, listen, this is not an occupied land. This is a disputed area because the West Bank was under the Jordanian rule and the Gaza Strip was rule. So what we will apply is the minimum human rights standards according to which we will provide humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians, and even we are not called Palestinians, to the Arabs living in the occupied Palestinian territory. So ever since, we are only, according to the Israeli point of view of the international law, we are under the minimum humanitarian standards in international law, whether it be international humanitarian law or the international human rights law.
On the overall, this social media thing is really a big tool that the Palestinians really this time got it. And they overcome Israel in this regard. Israel has been manipulative of the media in the whole world. And for me, as a person, as a Palestinian who all the time watch the Israeli channels, the Israeli news, the Israeli discussions, the Israeli debates on Israeli different channels, I can see how hurt they are because this time it got out of their hands. They brought experts from all over the world. They even, at one time, they were saying, we created this office 2 years ago to work as a propaganda office, to tell our story as Israelis. What happened with this one? He said it was not manned, so it was not run. And now it's up to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to do this battle. They lost. You know, if you go and look like someone like Bella Hadid is originally from Palestine, and she has millions of supporters. So once Bella Hadid was issuing statements in favor of Palestinians, the whole Americans followed her into the streets, wearing the kafiyah, saying slogans against Israeli apartheid, against Israeli occupation, against Israeli killings of the Palestinians, the occupied Palestinian territory. This was really a big message that was heard all over the world. This time, Israel has no control of. And as a product of this message, thankfully, we have islands that have criminalized the settlements, which for my astonishment, I found some people in the international human rights and humanitarian law community, scholars who are debating the legality of settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories. They are trying to justify the existence of settlements there, and they are trying to provide Israel with legal tools under international human rights law that it has the right to defend its settlers there. This is ridiculous. This is even like repulsive to find a scholar in international humanitarian law field who is trying to give Israeli tools while the whole world, while the United Nations in so many different decisions decided and ruled out that Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories is a war crime. And now someone is trying to give it, to legalize it. And even like, I remember meeting with the the first prosecutor at the ICC. Didn't know what he said. We were like I was working with Al-Haq, and we were like very cheerful and very happy because this is the most easy file that we can present to the ICC, the issue of the settlement. He said, don't be that happy because this is a difficult issue. I said, why it's a difficult issue? Because there are some experts who are trying to find and maneuver around on this issue and saying that, no, this is not totally illegal. There are settlements that have been built and That's it. That's it. But this, do you know a law in general? There is what is called continuous crime. This is a crime that was continued and still being continued until now, regardless of the settlement that was built in 1979 or in 1982 or whatever. This is international law, breach of law, and coming out to hear this thing from you as an ex-prosecutor of the ICC really does not let me feel very safe on the ICC and its proceeding. But going back to the media, going back to the social media, thank God it was created. Thank God it is there, because it gave us a big window that the whole world now, people, as my colleague was saying, Hassan, it's not complicated, it's very easy. I would like to, for anyone who listened to us or who will listen to us in the future, just do your job, do your due diligence, look up things before you believe whatever you are confronted with. Don't believe everything that is being said, even on the social media, although it was a big help for us. But there are a lot of flies there. There are a lot of flies inside even the mainstream media. Go check up your stories and you will find the true story lying there, plain sight.
Okay, so that was the video from both of the experts that we have, and three of the experts that we have interviewed from both Israel and Palestine. So now we'll be discussing the video as well as the issues with Professor. I believe the Professor, you have shared something in our chat, right? In the beginning. Yeah. Would you like to share your screen for the PowerPoint, or?
Yeah, just actually share the. It's just a two-page. It's just a two-page of slide. Mentioning about the topic that we discussed today, and also my YouTube channel, which I think I also provide you, for example, like, you know, there are 5 at least videos that I produce on my YouTube channel. You can access and go to access and so look. I think 3 of the video are in English. The other 2 is in Bahasa Malaysia. So for those who from Indonesia, probably you can understand. But from other countries, probably difficult for you to understand. So you probably can watch the other 3 videos. So so you want me to begin to
yeah. Let's jump into the discussion. So firstly, maybe I would like to ask from the video first before looking into our point of discussion today. But firstly, one of the main point that was different is that as Mr. Hassan from Palestine say, like, they don't view this as a war or a conflict. They think it's merely aggression against Palestine. I want to know, from your point of view, how could this ongoing or like really long hostility that is happening in Gaza or between Israel and Palestine should be called?
I think you can define, because this is a political terms rather than a legal terms. When it comes to war, whether this conflict can be called as a conflict or war or incursion, even though, for example, like me, when I assess and also commenting on this issue, I always use the word incursion rather than use the word war. Even though war actually also can sometimes when we talk about war is only rely on the degree of the war, whether it's a all-out war, civil war, or what kind of war that happen. So and I think in terms of Geneva Convention, international law actually doesn't really define clearly to what extent and to what degree that can be specified as a war. So but what interesting, with regard to this context, if you know, in order to understand the whole phenomena of this, this conflict, you don't only focus by looking in terms of international law alone, because it also involves many things. For example, politics, and also one of the speakers just now talked about social media, the psychological effect of that conflict, everything. But when back to the question, when it comes to the context of war, you know that pre League of Nations, the establishment of League of Nations, war actually legal. war was legal, and war as a method for settlement of dispute. For those who study international law, probably you're familiar with the issue of this dispute settlement. So war actually is a method. After you exhausted with so many other methods, such as negotiation, arbitration, or court, or even using sanction, embargo, then I think the last option actually war. So basically, actually, war is the way to negotiate. Even though it's become illegal after the establishment of the United Nations, and under the UN Charter as well is considered as illegal. But war is continue happen everywhere. It's not like a world war that we used to see after the second like the first World War and also Second World War. But war mostly like a proxy war between great nation, superpower, original power, is a way of them to negotiate. So I think what happened, incursion that happened in the 2014 and also 2020-21 actually is a form of negotiation between the Palestinians and also the Israelis, and to overcome so many issues that which is unsettled until today. So that's why you can interpret many ways the terms war or conflict or incursion, but we need to understand the reality. Is what the reality behind the war, in order to understand what what's going on and what actually happened during this period. Okay, another point which I think also very interesting in order to look on this issue. As we know that when we study about law, we always discuss about just ad bellum, also just in bello. So this is a term that use just ad bellum actually something what's trigger the war, whether the war is legal or not. But mostly under Article 51 of the UN Charter, already defined that war can be allowed collectively through self-defense. So that's also the argument brought by the Israelis in the past and also in the recent incident. And also there's the same argument also brought by the Palestinians, saying that they are under occupation, and so there's a retaliate to the suppression oppression by the Israeli military in particularly in ALSA mosque and also in Sheikh Jarrah. So in recent event. But in the context of war, we cannot only simply look in the context of just ad bellum, but also just bellow the practice during the war, not killing the civilians, meaning that the rule of the war, the rule of armed conflict need to be observed as well. But what is the interesting point? Before I also pass back to you regarding this context, Michael Walzer, great scholars, political scientists, also argue that in order to look on the context of war, besides looking on just ad bellum and just in bello, but also we need to look on the context of just post bellum, meaning what after the war, what's really happened after the war, which I think many people disregard of the context. For example, like now, when after the incursion recently, so what happened now? Are we just ignore what really happened and let Palestinian and Israeli discuss and so, or United Nations to get involved everything? So actually, a lot of things going on after the war recently. Meaning that there's a negotiation between all parties, try to come to the conclusion or solution of their long-standing crisis between these two. I would say it's more two entities because Palestine is not yet recognized as a state. It's just an associate member for United Nations. But what interesting fact is that after the war, Gaza war in 2014, there's an encouragement from the United Nations that Palestinians to apply as a member for ICC, International Criminal Court. So they did in 2014, and they managed to get accepted as a member, full member of ICC. So meaning that anything happened during the conflict in both nations. So ICC will do some, investigation, and the concern from Israel right now, whether the ICC will, produce, a report saying that ethnic cleansing happened, genocide happened, which is amount to sanction by international. Even though we know that there's a intervention normally by US to veto, motion by the United States against any action against Israel. But I think it's very damaging if ICC can able to produce a report like that, and because there's no other way anymore to Israel to defend itself against criticism from the international committee about its action in Palestine. So I think that's the issue is very complex and very interesting, and I think we can explore more in order to understand the conflict.
Okay, thank you very much. So before asking the questions about the escalation in 2014 as well, I would like to ask you if there are any other points from the video you would like to discuss, or also the participants, if you have any points, please feel free to press the raise hand button or type in the chat box right away. But back to Professor first, are there any points from the videos you still want to address?
Okay, I think there's a one point which is I think the main argument from both sides why there's a need to establish an Israeli state, for example, why there's a need to fight for the Palestinian in this context. Actually, what interesting fact is that both sides are going from the context of self-determination based on Article 1 of UN Charter. For me, Palestinian, which is clearly under occupation since 1967, particularly in Gaza and also West Bank, clearly have legitimacy in that argument to liberate themselves from occupation, and also occupying power is Israel. So under the international law, actually the argument is very solid, which is cannot be denied. But from Israeli point of view, I think that is also being debated. Because Israeli, I think since 1970s, that they try to project the idea of self-determination. Even though before that, before probably in 1960s, in 1950s, they always argue in the context of occupation because they have the right to occupy these areas because these areas been promised to them to build a nation. Because the idea of Zionism, Zionism is based on the word Zion, Zion or whatever your pronunciation is there. Actually, it's the last city of for the people of for the Jewish people. And I think if you notice recent argument from Naftali Bennett, the Prime Minister of Israel, when he argued about the last incursion, saying that this is the promised land. Nobody can deny it. This is promised land for the Jews. But and he argued that why this is promised land, because this is based on Torah, the religious books of Judaism. I'm happy to go to study also a little bit the Torah. Actually, what the promised land say is that is for the son of Abraham. So this is probably not from international law perspective, but it's more on a religious perspective or theology perspective. But when we talk about the land for the son of Abraham, descendant of Abraham, so I think the Arab also descendants of Abraham. So if you know the lineage between two wives of and also two sons of Abraham. So actually to deny, for example, Palestine, they're not from here. From from those areas, Jerusalem and several areas in Palestine, actually is not right, because they actually also descendant. This, which I think clearly under, if you can check from Genesis verses 18, it already spelled out this context. So they have the right also to the, meaning that not only the Jewish people. Okay, the only thing is Jewish people left after the Roman invaded those area and so, and they never came back. Until they come back in the 19th centuries, then they want to establish a nation, which I think amount to ethnic cleansing. So that's why being dispersed of the Palestinian peoples on that, and that conflict happened. So what the point that I want to mention here is about the argument of self-determination is not really well solid, argued by the Israelis to defend themselves. Actually, it's more solid to the Palestinians to defend themselves because they are the nation, the people being under suppress, under colonization of the Israelis.
Thank you very much for touching on that point. I think that's a very interesting point to see how both states do mention or use the same argument or law, and how it actually can be really different for both Palestine and Israel. So now we'll move on to the discussion, which is the main part of today, is the 2014 that many are called war, but as a long conflict, it's like an escalation that once in a while happen, right? Like the recent year as well. So for back in the reason why we are discussing 2014 specifically, it's because this year it has just been prosecuted by, or the ICC, not actually prosecuted, they just started the investigation on this event. So I would like to know more from you, because from the interview we only hear only the law behind it from their perspective, and only the first-hand kind of where Mr. Weil just say that he went there in 2015 and see the destruction. Maybe we can discuss a bit like what actually happened in 2014 and why did the situation escalate and why were there such hostility happening there?
Okay, I think in 2014, if I remember, actually started from the kidnapping of the 3 Israelis youth. So and the Israeli government actually accused Hamas committed in this kidnapping, also killing of this youth, which I think Hamas denied until today. But the person that being accused, happened to be a member of Hamas. I don't know whether Hamas also has membership, that normal membership of organization that we have or not. But those persons being accused actually claiming or even claimed by Israel to be member of Hamas. So that start the escalation. And many scholars that observe in these incidents, saying that there's an attempt as well by Hamas to tell the world, actually, because they are under blockade. Gaza is under blockade, so they need to start something escalation in order to, this issue become the main issue for the world to see. So that's why it started with this, and then they shot the rocket. When it started shot the rocket, then it become a world news. And because of that, the Israelis starting bombardment, and also send the ground troop to Palestine, so to Gaza. So that I think within 1 month of the escalation, you can see, I think it's mentioned by the speaker just now, many Palestinians died. I think about more than 2,000. Many also children. And also the Israelis from the Israeli side, I think about 70% died. I think out of 70%, 73%, only around 3 to 5, I think, if I remember. Actually civilians, the rest actually military. So who are all those military? They are actually special force that attack Gaza, but they managed to be stopped by the Hamas, Hamas militants, the Islamic Jihad group, and also Abu Qasim group. So because of that, they didn't stop. Okay, that's, I think, based on the report and also a discussion among reporters and also scholars, during that period. When I observe the context, I always observe actually what trigger this issue. Okay, from Palestinian side, many accuse that Hamas tried to trigger this to get the attention from the world. But from Israeli side, actually, the incidents trigger many also argue that because of the problem that faced by the Israeli government, because the Israeli government also almost collapsed during the period, and because there's an infighting in the party, in the coalition led by Likud party or Benjamin Netanyahu. So, and Benjamin Netanyahu used this issue to gain support to his party. And this didn't happen in June, but in December, the parliament dissolved and they have election the next year. So if you observe this, this incident is almost similar to what happened recently. Recently is because of first I think because of the issue of PLA, which is a Palestinian Liberation Authority election, which has been delayed for 15 years. Can you imagine 15 years without elections? And the concept is if they have an election, so Hamas will win the election in Palestine. So that's one point. The second point is the Israelis. The Israelis also have 4 elections in the past 2 years. So and you see the context of election is about Benjamin Netanyahu versus the opposition, meaning that many people really anti Benjamin Netanyahu. So somehow in the election, Benjamin Netanyahu won, but with the very small majority, with 34% of the votes. So Benjamin Netanyahu actually used this incursion in order to call of the Israelis to support him. But in fact, recently it's backfire because it seems that Israelis really more against him rather than for him, because they see the effect of the war of the recent incursion actually really backfire them from international society, community point of view, social media really against, and suddenly you can see that openly around the world, or even US media and many institutions around the world claiming that apartheid state, Israel is an apartheid state, which has never happened before. So because of that, many Israelis really more angry actually towards Benjamin Netanyahu. So that's why they recently they voted, in the Knesset to topple him, and Naftali Bennett replaced as a prime minister. So actually, all this dynamic contributed to the incursion in the recent incursion. So that's why I think we don't have to look only from law perspective, because it's a political decision involved in many contexts in order to understand really the whole issues. But another thing which I think also very important is that there are many actually we can talk about issue of wall, for example, which is also illegal wall built in the area under occupation, and also if we talk about international law, we can talk about the Hague regulation, for example. So meaning that there's a protection. Any nations under occupation must be protected. So, and should be allowed them to practice their own penal code, for example, should be allowed. So I think in the video that I provided to you, we did really explain about this. And the illegal settlement should be stopped. Should not be expanded more in the future. So what actually being protected, actually the Palestinian in this context. But Israeli from time to time always ignore these issues, keep going to occupy more land, in West Bank particularly, even though they left in Gaza, but they occupy more land because what they aim actually to establish what they call is, the Great Israelis, the Great Israel, which is Jerusalem become their capital city, the whole West Bank, including the Jordanian Valley under the occupations, So that I think the agenda, which I think now being pressured from international committee, for international organizations like ICC, internations, and actually, if you notice, there's one journalist, Thomas Friedman, who wrote books like The Lasers and Olive Tree. Thomas Friedman also argued that the reason why there's a sudden change of approach of Israel recently because of the election in United States, change of presidents. even though actually Donald Trump actually very pro-Israeli, pro Benjamin Netanyahu, but Joe Biden actually, even though very close to Benjamin Netanyahu, but he actually cannot, cannot stand with so many opposition in his own party against supporting Israel. So that's why he need to do something, something to turn around the image of Israel to be more positive right now rather than very negative during the elections. So that's why they have to change the leader first. But now we are waiting whether they also change the policy. Because part of the coalition in the Israeli government actually there's a one Arab party that I think also can influence decision by. So I think we need to continue to see the progress of what's going on. But back to the issue of 2014, ICC still doing an investigation. Even until today, still try to find the truth and what's going on with the incursions. Then I think they're going to produce a report, which I think something that US and even Israel try to avoid, because I suspect the report would condemn the killing of the Palestinians and also will label Israel as an apartheid state, and also ethnic cleansing happened in the land of Palestine. So I think probably that's something that going on. I think in the future we can see it happen.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that is a very new perspective, an important perspective to see that the inside government of Israel actually really influence these situations. So before moving on to that, actually, as the organizing committee of this event, I want to share with everyone that it was actually hard to reach speakers from Israel for the interview, and Mr. Michael Smart here actually, do advocate for the Palestine and the Palestinian minorities within Israel. So because of that, we may not have heard about some of the arguments from Israel that they are justifying their actions, or we do not totally understand the perspective of Israel yet, why they are doing what they're doing. So because of that, we hear from Professor that there is the government aim, but there are also citizens' aim. So we would like to ask to elaborate on this a bit more, what actually the government of Israel want. Like, why are they occupying more land? Why are they, whatever they're doing? And what do the citizens of Israel actually want? And is it the same as the government?
Okay, I think from people to people perspective, actually in Israel itself, the people very divided in the context of there's Israelis is not one only type of nation. Actually, they are also divided into several group, ethnic group actually. People from, for example, like coming from Middle East, coming from from Africa, coming from the former Russian countries. They all have even not looking at perspective of religion as well. There's ultra-orthodox, they also conservative, they also liberals groups. There also are people that pro-Zionism and anti-Zionism. So they are divided, really divided in this context. And of course, there are people that fed up already to see what's going on with the with the government of Israel, how the government conduct in Palestine, territory. So that's why their group they actually demand for quick settlement, meaning quick to resolve this conflict. However, as we know that Benjamin Netanyahu is very very conservative in the approach, and also supporting the expansion of Israel states. And also Naftali Bennett, the only thing Naftali Bennett, the current prime minister, actually he got problem because he formed a coalition with just only one vote. So anything can happen. The government can collapse and so on, and they're going to have another election because of that, probably. But of course, there are so many factions in this coalition, so he need to listen to all the factions, including from group the Israeli Arabs who also in the part of the coalitions. But we can see that I think people demand the end of this conflict. And but the problem is, what is the solutions to end of this conflict? Okay, since Oslo Accord, you can see that there's at least option on the table, two-state solution to resolve these issues. Meaning that for the Palestinian territory, go back to the pre-1967 territory, West Bank and also Gaza. The rest actually belong to Israel. Actually, at one time, Yitzhak Rabin also Yasser Arafat already agree on this. But because of the agreement that they signed, also I think there's a really showcase, shake hand between those two leaders. That caused the life of Yitzhak Rabin when he was murdered, assassinated because of that. Because it considers betrayal to the Israeli people. Then Yasser Arafat also, then suddenly these ideas being abandoned. But I think the PLO or Fatah movement still accept of this agenda two-state solution. Hamas Hamas actually before the recent invasion also agree to that solution, two-state solution. But now they say no, we no longer accept two-state solutions. But surprisingly, Israel, after the killing of Yitzhak Rabin and Benjamin Netanyahu, and now they still maintain that they don't see two-state solution as an option. So then what happened? Some argue that, okay, why not? But that also concern, that bring anxiety to the Israelis, because if both nations combine, the majority actually Palestinian or Arabs, so they actually will hold the power in I don't know what's nation being called by the Palestine or also Israel. So probably that's also not the option. So what is the best option? So that's, I think, lawyers, how and to overcome this solution, this conflict. So that I think require United Nations to intervene, to become mediator to resolve this dispute. Because if this dispute never been resolved, I think the escalation incursion will continue, and that's also require US become more involved as a mediator, even though it's not a trusted mediator, but because US still holds a position as a superpower, so it can influence decision from Israelis, for example, and also the Palestinians. But the problem back to the issue of Hamas, how Hamas can be involved in this, because Hamas being labeled as a terrorist group. So US, even the current State Secretary, tried actually avoided to meet Hamas recently, because worry that if they meet, then meaning that it's a recognition of US to Hamas. So somehow I think the best way to negotiate on this issue, Hamas also need to be negotiated, because they actually hold a strong support, not only in Gaza but also in West Bank. So I think through negotiation can be resolved, and I think there's a concession need to be achieved in this matter. So if you ask me, I also have no solution that I can think of. But probably both sides can the best to decide for themselves. So we just observe and help them as we could in order to resolve these issues.
Thank you very much. So before next, I actually would like to move on to the recent incident and compare it to the past a bit more. But before that, I would like to ask the participants a bit about their opinion and also discuss a bit on the ICC proceeding, because we can see that as Mr. Wallace say, the people from Palestine, a lot of them don't have a lot of faith in the ICC. So I want to know the opinions of the participants. If you see the poll, can you please help vote? Do you think the ICC would prosecute any individuals from in this case? Okay, so I will let the vote go on for 10 more seconds. So if you haven't voted, please do. All right, I'm counting down 5 seconds for the vote. So the vote will be anonymous. So, okay, so now, okay, thank you everyone who participated in the voting. So this is the result that we have. So actually, quite a considerable number of people chose yes. Okay, so now we would like to hear from Professor. What is your view on the ICC investigation and proceeding? Do you think, how would they, what will be the result, or what will likely be from your observation, things that will happen from this? Yeah.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think Israelis will definitely deny or even because they never recognize ICC, because they're not part of the signatory of ICC, and also US. Even US, I think it's a signatory, but they never ratify ICC. So in fact, during the Trump's administration, Trump even labeled ICC as a kangaroo court, cannot be trusted and so on. But I think we also don't have any option. I think ICC is the best option to find justice in these issues. And definitely ICC through their proceeding will subject to certain individuals who clearly involved or been accused as committing war crime, particularly in 2014 Gaza war. So people like who, for example, like Benjamin Netanyahu, who instructed the incursion, the military, attack to Gaza. I think most definitely one of the person that probably been called, will be called for to the court. But I don't think he will comply. I don't think also Israeli government also will allow him to go there. But actually, if they want to allow him to go there, I think they can do that, because Benjamin Netanyahu no longer hold any position in the government, so there's no diplomatic immunity for him. So definitely he can be subject to be called from or can be subpoenaed to ICC. But I think this is a constraint of ICC as well, to bring justice, and they also face problem to visit those areas and to meet people and so on, because definitely visa would not be issued by Israeli government. And but I think there are also some articles that I agree. I read from Israel side also always they argue that they never recognize, so they never thinks that the Rome Statute can be applied to them in this case. But I beg to differ to that argument, because the issue of genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crime, we always under the term jus cogent. So under the jus cogent, meaning that proceeding can be held in order to find justice on that kind of issues. I think that's also similar case when Gambia brought the case of Myanmar with regard to Rohingya genocide to the ICJ. So even though many argue that how this can happen, because normally two states who are in dispute can bring this case to the court, but in this context only one state bring the case to the court. But because the Myanmar side, they know that this is also very damaging to them if suddenly ICJ takes side with the give judgment against them and also agree with the Gambian argument. So that's why they have to defend. That's why Aung San Suu Kyi when they're during the proceedings. So in this case, I think the best way is ICC continue to proceed in this case and keep pressuring, keep pressure the Israeli governments to comply for international law, because they keep denying international law for quite some time. I think what's at least 70 years, 73 years since the establishment of the Israeli state. But I think they should be stopped somewhere from committing this crime. So I think we applaud. For example, I'm very applaud the proceeding that happened in in ICC. So hopefully it can bring justice to the Palestinians, and that's my hope. let's see what happens in the future.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. So now, before asking the question about the recent incident, I would like to know, again, our participants' opinion on what is the biggest difference between the escalation in 2014 and the present. So to give a big background first before Professor will elaborate on it more, the present case, as we see on the news and in social media, that Palestinians are being forced to. Okay, so I will let the vote on for 10 more seconds. Okay, the voting result is actually very shocking. Okay. Okay. 3, 2, 1. I will finish the polling now. Okay, so we actually got all equal choices here. Okay, so now maybe we hear from Professor first what is happening now, and then its comparison to the 2014.
Okay, I just explained just now. There's a similarity between these two incidents. The background of the incidents. Probably what triggered the escalation probably different. As we know that in 2014 is because of the kidnapping, but in 2021, actually because of what happened in ALSA Mosque and also what happened to Sheikh Jarrah. So because of that, there's a retaliation from. But in terms of the escalation, the amount of force being used, particularly with Israel towards toward Palestinian, particularly in Gaza, is more greater in 2014 rather than the recent event, because recent event is just just I think 2 weeks, compared to the 2014, which is a month. But in terms of the one being targeted, you can see that the UN school being bombed, during the 2014, killing also children over there, and in the case of 2021, when the media, buildings being also bombed. So we know that, in terms of the target of escalation from the Israeli side is really not following the Geneva Convention, protocol 4, for example. But I think what interesting to observe the recent event is, like also mentioned by the panels just now, the change of public opinion in the world so great. I think it's also surprised many in US and also in particularly in Israel itself, and also around the world, because I also never heard before that people, of course, among Muslims, for example, we always argue that Israel is an apartheid state, but never been around the world such level given to Israel, particularly in the recent context. So that actually, in terms of war of public opinion, okay, when we talk war, not only the exact war, but also war of public opinion, so we need to observe, actually changed drastically. I don't know why. Probably many argue that because of somehow this suppression against Palestinian by the Israelis almost similar that what happened to the black with Black Lives Matters movement. So that's why this group also supporting the Palestinian in this context, and there's a lot of demonstration around the world supporting Palestinian. So this makes Israel struggle actually to counter narrative of the narrative against Israel. So I think that's current incursion more damaging actually to Israelis or Israeli government rather than in 2014. Even though 2014 also damaging because the investigation against Israeli governments on, but still the public opinion still have some sympathy toward Israel because they see Israeli being harassed by Hamas, and they also always claim that the war in 2014 and also recent incursion is always war not between Israel and Palestine, but actually it's between Israel and also Hamas. That also the opinion from Israeli ambassador to Singapore, when he argued he want to establish a diplomatic relation with Malaysia, Indonesia, and also Brunei. He tried to explain that the recent incursion is about incursion between between Hamas and also Israel is not the Palestinian, even though we clearly see that it's not about Hamas. It's more about about Palestinian, how to occupy, control more of the Palestinian territory. That's what happened in Sejarah actually, and also more. So that's I think you can see the dynamic of the issue is almost similar, but there's different dynamic, and the outcome also seems that now Israel is in defensive to ensure that they're not being portrayed and also they're not being condemned around the world as an aggressor, and also I think there's also previously there's a manipulation of the media as well, who not argue on the side of Palestinians. But now I think because of social media, even news, mainstream news in US able to explain this case in quite a balance. So it makes public opinion also shift. That I think require quite some time for Israel in order to overcome this narrative. So that's I think very interesting to see how the different things to war.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think the time has come for our Q&A. So if any participants have any questions, please press the raise hand button or simply type into the chat. But there was a question that was raised already before this, which the question was, what is the legality of constructing a wall on the occupied territories of Palestine? And what is the applicability of universal jurisdiction in the present times? Yeah.
I think there's no justification of building a wall, because clearly the wall was built across the territory of the Palestinian in the West Bank. So of course the wall was built to protect the settlers, and but that I think really illegal because they cannot build a wall. Israeli can build a wall within their borders. I think should be okay if they want to build a wall to protect themselves. But if you build a wall across the occupied land, I think is something illegal. It cannot be accepted. So that's why I think to build a wall is not a right thing to do, which is I think clearly illegal and under the international law and should be condemned. But somehow the wall still stands, and I don't know how long we can see. I don't know whether we have to wait until the incident what happened to the Berlin Wall when the communist collapsed, and then you can see the building the wall also collapsed. But in this context, I'm not sure if the agreement can be agreed between both. For example, like if they agree on the two-state solution, give back the West Bank to the Palestinians, then I think we can see some part of the wall being demolished. So I don't know, probably that's something we do. But in terms of the legality, it's clearly illegal to build a wall.
I think there was another question about like the applicability of universal jurisdiction, or basically any state can, prosecute anyone who join. For example, if a criminal considered internationally causing threat to the international community, being in Thailand, for example, anyone from Thailand can prosecute that. Is it applicable in the present time?
You mean prosecute somebody who are committing war crime?
Yeah, international crime.
I think depends on the context. But normally government we come to the conclusion that can prosecute somebody if the person involves something conflict in within their territories. That's I think clear. But if somebody from happened. For example, in the case of what's happened in Palestine and Israel. So whether we can bring this case to Malaysia, I think we can establish. I think within our right. If something will involve jus cogens, so I think any countries can prosecute. This is under universal jurisdiction. I think if you learn into law, probably you're familiar with the concept of universal jurisdiction. So any country can bring the case against somebody, even though that somebody commit not against that country, but against humanity, for example, happen in somewhere else. But of course, depends on the context of the countries want to bring this case or not to the country. But relying as well, many countries also rely of other, for example, like United Nations to do this job, to discuss, to prosecute those people. That's why the establishment, for example, of ICTY, for example, International Criminal Tribunal of former Yugoslavia, and also Rwanda. So then I think there's also recent debate who should establish a tribunal for the for the down MH17 Malaysia Airlines aircraft was shot down in eastern Ukraine. Who should be blamed and so on. Actually, there's an argument saying that Malaysia should bring this case because of the aircraft from Malaysia, but Netherlands say that we want to take the task because most of the people who kill actually from Netherlands. So that's subject to debate. So anybody can bring the case, but because the case want to be brought to the attention of Security Council to establish a resolution, to establish a tribunal, but somehow Russia veto to that process. So that's why they need to come out to we need to find one country that can be responsible to establish a tribunal again to prosecute, to bring justice on that case. But the problem is Russia until today still deny any responsibility in that incident. So I think that's the reality in this context. So for the Palestinian and also Israel, I think Israel also used to prosecute somebody in the case, for example, like Eichmann case. If you're familiar with Eichmann case, who committed a genocide, who left, I think, for Argentina, so been detained and brought to justice. So never committed crime against Israelis. The only thing he committed crime in the concentration camp during the Holocaust. So that's why the case was brought and be put to justice. So I think it depends on the context. So I cannot say it can apply across the board, but actually it depends on the context of the case.
Thank you very much. So we have a question. We will get to Sajini soon. She raised her hand, but we have a question from Angelo. I will read it out for everyone. Many people see that Israel is playing the victim card here because of what they had experienced before. But in fact, Israel may now be seen as aggressor of what they're doing in Palestine from the annexation and occupation of the land, which belongs to Palestine. I want to ask, how can we achieve peace between Israel and Palestine, and what can we contribute as mere citizens of our respective countries?
Yeah. Our contribution, at least what we can do is to tell the truth, what's really happened, through our observation, through our reading, our research, for example. We need to explain to public, because clearly in this case of Israel Palestine, the aggressor to these issues actually the Israelis, clearly. Because they're occupying Palestinian land, so not vice versa. So that I think is clear. So we need to explain it, and the more we know about this case, the more we need to share with the others, and also it built into opinion, public opinions around the world to pressure Israel actually to somehow, go to the table and so discuss with Palestinians, even discuss with Hamas. During the incident, okay, even though I explained just now the domestic politics of Israeli politics that also contribute to the recent incursion, but I think Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu were also concerned about the dynamic that happened in the Middle East. Okay, what I want to say there, this is more politics rather than law. but actually somehow interrelated. Because since the change of government from Donald Trump to Joe Biden in US, Joe Biden actually a bit different in approach. He want actually to bring back, on the table to discuss to regain the Iran, nuclear treaty, meaning that they want to re-establish the treaty. So now they start already the negotiation. During the Trump administration, Trump actually pushed many countries in the Middle East to somehow, reject or remove fight against the Iranian or Iranian proxy as well in Yemen and also in Syria. But since the change of government in US, Biden approach actually push the countries in the Middle East to find solution with Iran to establish a more peaceful Middle East. So you can see that exactly during that incursion, there's a negotiation, a discussion in Baghdad between representative from the Saudi Arabia and also representative from Iran to reconcile their differences and bring peace in the Middle East. Okay, if you think that if the bring peace in Israel in the Middle East, actually is not something which Israel want to see, because the more conflict in the Middle East, I think it's favor Israel to establish. The more unite Muslim countries, that's concern Israel. So that I think reason why the incursion also happened, to see how the public opinion, the world opinion, still whether they are still with Israel or not. Then definitely it's not. So and people want to see the more peaceful Middle East. So this I think very interesting development that happened in the Middle East. So back to the question just now, what we can do, because I think we live so far away. For example, me in Malaysia, of course we not related with Palestinian at all, even Israelis, except for probably I'm Muslim, they also Muslim, so we have some kind of that connection, But the connection should be not only based on religion itself, but also should be based on humanity. So because if we think about humanity, we want to see whatever happened in the Middle East, particularly in the Israel-Palestine, should protect the people, to bring the humanity in that situation. So meaning that whatever happened, whether the Israeli aggression towards Palestinians, we need to condemn. Also, if Hamas also show their intention against, for example, Israelis killing civilians, we also need to condemn. So we need to be fair in all the contexts. But in reality, is that the more people who suffer actually in these issues, actually the Palestinians. So we need to pressure actually the Israelis to come to the solutions and at least give back, the portion, meaning the territory, West Bank and Gaza, to the Palestinians, back to the pre-1967, at least to that situation first. Then I think we can negotiate further how the refugees can come back to their villages and so on. Then we can discuss, because many of the people who become exile everywhere, become refugees, actually they have their hometown, their home village somewhere also in the Israeli territory. So that I think need to be negotiated. But I think at least first give back West Bank and Gaza to the Palestinians, then we can at least create some harmonious relation between two nations first. Then I think we can discuss other concerning issues related to these two nations as well.
Thank you very much. So now we have Saijini. Sorry.
Yes. Hello. I have two questions. The first one is, we saw that in the recent conflict time, there was some sort of vetoing by USA for the proposal of deploying the UN peacekeepers in the conflict area. And I wanted to know whether the same situation happened in 2014. And in a situation like this, what can UN do as a organ that is established to ensure world peace? And my second question is, Israel claims that they sort of warn the Palestinian civilians before attacks. Um, does it at any point make the attack legal, and can they bring it as a defense if at all they are prosecuted?
Okay, before Professor answered the question, I think your photo or video is disconnected.
I see.
Not the screen, but like your face. But I think it's okay. You're fully audible, so you can address the questions right away. Just want to let you know for a reference. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think the first question is about veto. So, as we know that there are many resolutions were brought to the Security Council because Security Council is the only body that can issue resolution which is legal, against meaning that in order to resolve any of conflict that happen around the world. So the problem is many resolution brought to the Security Council always veto by US, particularly that involve Israelis. So actually, we can say that US is a protector of protector of Israel in many ways. So that's why they favor sending military aids yearly to Israel. So that I think bring the criticism, not so much against US, but also against United Nations. That's why there's an argument, even used to argue by our Malaysia Prime Minister Tun Mahathir Mohamad, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, arguing that we need to reform United Nations to allow or even to abolish this veto system or whatever. So I doubt that can happen. So I'm not sure how also whether we can deal with this issue. But but the argument from the Palestinian side saying that they need to involve more with the politician, policymaker in US. They know that lobby system, organization like IPAC and so on is very so strong in US, and also lobby from the evangelical Christians, a group of evangelical Christians, in US supporting Israel, which is also very interesting if I want to prolong to discuss about the arguments why they're supporting Israel. But now I think you can see that more and more Muslim become, not also non-Muslim in US become prominent, fighting for the Palestinian against the Israelis. So that's why you can see there's a change of approach. But back to the question, veto, this is something which unprecedented, meaning that something that the only way to change the approach is by to change of mindset of American leaders in looking in these issues. So instead of they always supporting Israel, why not they also be critical to Israel as well to serve the humanity? What happened in this conflict? Okay, the second question about attacking. Of course, many argue, even the recent incidents, Israeli argue that the reason why they attack Gaza is because Hamas attacked them, rocket. So, but that also been countered by not only president but also many journalists, many scholars saying that the reason Hamas attacked because actually Israeli attacked first at the ALSA mosque and also Sheikh Jarrah when they want to evicted people who live over there. So this argument I think will be prolonged. But I think what is most important thing is actually to find the best solution to this all issues. And I think Israel also they need to suspend any of their activities, probably in the West Bank. I think they still continue until today to evict people, to destroy homes and so on, to build new settlements. This I think need to be stopped. Because if this prolonged, then I think we can see more and more attacks from Hamas, for example, who justify they attacked because of this kind of issue of invasion and so occupation in West Bank. And actually, one also very interesting point. One of the speakers just now talking about similarity between apartheid state in Israel Palestine issues and also apartheid state in South Africa. So he see the similarity of the policy of the countries. So for me, for me, the only way to resolve these issues, how this is the issue in South Africa being resolved because of when suddenly public opinion changed around the world against South Africa apartheid government, then United Nations started to issue a sanction against South Africa. Then because of that, they reconciled. They decided to change the policy and give the power back to the majority, the black people over there. So I think this process being going on right now. There's a movement to boycott Israeli as well. And public opinion already changed, but not as massive as before. But now I think you can see there's a lobby and a movement try to change the perception of policymaker in US to see clearly of this issue, not to be biased, and also pressure Israel to come to the table and to discuss and to find a solution on these issues. So I think the same process take place, and I don't know how long it takes, but at least we can assist them as well, and to observe what's going on in order for us also to know what's going on, and also to find a solution and to help to assist the situation in Israel and also Palestinian issue as well.
Okay, I think. Oh yeah, Sajini, raise your hand. Yeah, please.
Yes, thank you very much for that explanation. If I may have a follow-up question for the first question, is there anything else that the UN as a world peace, as a body that ensures world peace can do? For an example, did they establish any fact-finding missions after the 2014 Gaza war? Is there anything that UN as an organ did?
I think they already established commissions, kind of truth commissions to find exactly what's going on. And I think they also, I think recently, I think last March, if I'm not mistaken, they visited Israel and also Palestine, but I think they have problem to visit over there because somehow Israeli government very hostile towards ICC. So actually, that's effort taken by international through ICC and through other bodies like UN Human Rights Councils, for example, to find to find a solution to these issues. But I think in reality we can see, we actually mostly knows, what's going on. What meaning that what when we talk about international law, what law being breached in this context. Actually we know already. The only thing is now ICC or international want to put all of that into one report to condemn, meaning that they not only just a simple report, but actually to condemn strongly against Israelis, like mentioning that there are apartheid state, genocide happen or any cleansing happens on. So to the extent that international committee and also international can take further more steps to sanction Israel or something like that. Because now I think in order to do that, it's difficult because US still supporting Israel. If they're able to change the mindset that I mentioned of the US policymaker, then I think probably we can see a different approach. There's slightly change now. For example, like in the Democratic Party in the government of US, they call it a group. It's a center-left group, which I think really against Israel right now. So led by Bernie Sanders. So I don't know how this group, whether they're strong enough to influence Joe Biden's policy on Israel-Palestine. But we know that the action taken by Biden mostly actually influenced by Obama, and Barack Obama actually very against Benjamin, very anti Benjamin Netanyahu, and because Benjamin Netanyahu used to, I think in 2000, if not mistaken, 2015, condemn Obama during the Congress, session openly. So it is considered as an insult to Obama. So that's why Obama was very against Israeli policy previously. So that actually also influenced Joe Biden now become more, more strict. Even though not showing openly in the public, but very behind the door, actually very strict, pressuring the Israelis to at least give some leeway or concession to the Palestinians, and so come back to the table to discuss, to resolve these issues. So I think the only thing is that the process takes time. Even the commission that established also takes time. 2014, even until today, I still have yet to issue a report. So that I think something we have to, wait, and so don't let then that even though we can be disappointed with the long process of this, but sometimes something cannot be something we cannot overcome. We cannot do anything. It really takes time to resolve some certain issues. For example, like Lockerbie case, it takes very long time before it comes to the conclusion. So I think similar to the case of this, I think, which I think already take 70 more years. I can see that 10 or 20 more years to come if this conflict prolong. So that's why it's best for us to come to the conclusion, find the solution as soon as possible.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think we have come to the end as we're running out of time. So we'd like to thank you, Professor, again. So Vice President of ALSA International will be addressing our closing speech. And if I may,
is it possible for me to give question to the audience?
Oh yeah, sure. Yes. If since we were actually concerned because it's past your time, but if you have a little bit of time to spare, please do. Yeah.
Okay, I believe that most of the audience are students, of the national law or student of law. So I want to raise one question, then probably you go back. I don't want to give the answer, but you go back to find the answer to this. Okay, many argue that, Hamas shoot the rocket indiscriminately against the civilians of the Israelis. And as we know that, most of the population of Israelis, they enter into military service. At the age of 18, 17, 18, they already can enter into military service. But if you look on the population of Israel right now, I think more than 60% of the population actually at the age of 15 and above. But only at the age of 17, I think they can enter into military service. So do we consider military service, people who enter into military service as a military personnel, military combatants? So meaning that military combatants, if they've been targeted, is it legal or illegal in the context of international law? Because I know if you look on convention, for example, like Convention of Right of Children, CRC, and also you look on the ICC, Rome Statute, really legalize, illegalize the age of entering into military service. So the age to enter into military service below the age of 15 actually illegal. Above 15 actually legal, according to the international law. So you can see that certain military, personnel at the age of 16 is normal actually. So back to the question, in the case of this, if Hamas targeting the civilian, but happen to be the civilian involved, also take part in the military service, so whether they consider as civilian or they consider as a military personnel. So what's your thought about that? So you can discuss among yourself.
Thank you. Does anyone want to raise your opinion before we close the session? Maybe Pon Louis, I'm not sure if I pronounced your name right, from Cambodia. Oh, Saijini. Okay, Saijini.
I think, in my opinion, as long as it sounds bizarre, but I think that as they are armed, they will be considered combatants, even though it sounds horrific. But I feel like in the battlefield, they will be combatants.
Thank you, Sajini. Does anyone else also want to voice their opinion? Or maybe you can also type in the chat. To recap, the question is that if Hamas would be attacking civilians, but these civilians are part of the military group of Israel, but which is mandatory, like it is mandatory for them to join. But then if Hamas attack them, would that be legal or illegal? Maybe Angelo, would you like to share your thoughts? Okay, if maybe no one else, then maybe we can hear from Professor in regards to the opinion being raised. Oh, we have Regina. Okay, Regina.
Okay, yeah. Okay, hello. In my opinion, I agree with what has been mentioned by Sajini, that the military personnel who is still in training, like not like the one in military service, can be considered as a combatant because they receive a direct order from the government, and then the direct order can include them being part of the armed conflict initiatives. So that is why, in my opinion, that as long as they are being directed by someone in responsible in the war, in the conflict, they should be considered as part of the military.
Thank you, Regina. Okay. So does anyone else? Okay. So I think we have everyone. We got a few heart and likes from the participants. Okay, so thank you. Does Professor want to say any last point in regards to their opinions or any closing remark, as I think our session has come to an end?
Yeah, I think this is a very good session, which I think we can engage. We can see this issue from so many angles, side, not only international law, but also politics behind it, So I think the more you explore on this issue, I think the more you can understand, and so you can have your own opinion regard to this. For example, like question that I raised to you just now, these are the issue that been debated. Because Hamas also argue that they're not attacking civilians. Actually, they are attacking military personnel, combatants, because they are all involved in the military service. So whether this can be acceptable or not. But I think most international lawyers, I think they agree that what Hamas did actually also against international law, indiscriminately killing to civilians. But of course, this come to the debate when military service in question in this context, whether those who involved and consider as a combatants. But I think my last point probably, I think hopefully you can explore yourself about this and also keep learn about the situations and make sure that you understand the whole issues. Then I think you can gain a lot of things, knowledge, not only knowledge, but also can become activists and seeing how important human rights, for example, humanitarian issues, the humanity side of the issues, and so on. So thank you very much for inviting me to be able to share my thoughts as well with you, and so probably one day we can have a more session like this, which I also can involve.
Thank you so much, Professor, for joining such a session that it's at the same time, as many would want it to be simple, but also involves so many dimensions and elements. So now, as the end, we would like to give an official expression of gratitude from ALSA International. by Vice President of Training, Exchange and Development, and also with the certificate. I'm not sure how to take a proper photo. Okay, right. So if we can take a photo with the thing. All right, here. Okay.
Okay, for Professor Aziz, once again, thank you very much for your attendance. And me, myself, have received a lot of new perspective from the political side on the background, the context, and what could possibly happen in the future following to the ongoing aggression between the two sides. And because of that, I hope all participants can also learn a lot of new things and be interested to pursue more research or gather more findings in regards to this topic, and that this event will be being useful for everyone here and also everyone who is watching from our YouTube channel. And yeah, the certificate of appreciation is for Professor Aziz. We hope that we can meet again in other event to talk about other topics.
Okay, let's take a quick photo. 1, 2, 3. Okay. One more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much. And now we will take another photo with all participants, but I believe, did someone raise your hand? Or is it all good now? Okay, all good. So let's take a group photo from just the Zoom. I will finish the live stream on YouTube now. So for all participants of ALSA International Legal Discussion 2014, Aftermath of Gaza War, International Law Perspective. Thank you very much.